President Reagan today offered a softer line on the Soviet Union, but no new ideas on how relations between the two countries could be significantly improved. The president's speech came as several polls indicate that the public is concerned about his hardline attitude toward Moscow.
Gone were references to the Soviets as an evil empire. Today, the president said he wants to reduce the use of force in international disputes and to cut weapons stockpiles.
That was from NBC Nightly News in January of 1984, covering Ronald Reagan pulling back from some of his tough rhetoric on the Soviet Union. Compare that to the change to the policy shifts we're seeing from President Trump, by some counts 4 in one day this past Wednesday. Joining us from Washington, presidential historian, author, and NBC News contributor Michael Beschloss, and editor of Time magazine and co-author of the book, The President's Club, Inside the World's Most Exclusive Fraternity, Nancy Gibbs. Mark Halperin and David Ignatius both back with us as well. Well, looking at the changes that we've seen in the past week, sometimes in one day, Michael Beschloss, I'll start with you. Any precedent for that in history?
Well, I think it depends on what this turns out to be, Mika. You know, if this was just sort of 1-2 week period that was sort of a fluke, and then, you know, we go on to changes in other areas, then we're back to the first couple of months in this administration. But I would like to think that what this was the first 2 months of Trump's sort of a shakedown period where Bannon and Flynn were there, and now he realizes that if he wants to be a successful president, he's got to get people around him who know what he does not know. Ronald Reagan did that. George Shultz, Jim Baker, foreign and domestic. You know, when you try and think of the way Trump thinks, David Ignatius, there was an interesting confluence of events this week, or in the past 10 days, where you had, you know, the obvious horrific video coming out of Syria of the gas attacks. You had the pressure to remove Bannon and the moves to get him out of there. And the scoreboard, no points on the board for this president domestically. It seemed like in some ways it could have been a good merging of events and personalities.
You know, I was struck, Mika, by the way in which the president last week took ownership of moral responsibility for being president. He talked so emotionally about the pictures of the little children who'd been gassed in Syria, and then he said, this is my responsibility now. His initial response was to blame Obama. Obama's weakness led us into this, but then as he got into it, he seemed to realize, no, this is mine. And then moving forward from that, I thought he did take ownership more of his presidency than he had in the first 2 months.
So, Nancy, I guess the question we've been asking now for 3 or 4 days is, does it stick? You know, it's just, we've learned, I think, rightly to be skeptical when President Trump presents himself one way, and it could be something else by tomorrow morning. Who knows? What's your sense of, though? Is this a real evolution? Is this a president who's learning about the job, someone who's never participated really in politics before?
Well, you know, we know about him that I think he likes what works, and what he was doing wasn't working. And so in that sense, he was not going to keep doing it. You know, the definition of insanity is thinking that would change. But this is day 85. This is still a very unfinished portrait. And I think the big question that we'll be watching is, you've been pointing out this morning, when Congress comes back, when this is about domestic policy, will we see a different tone? Will we see fewer incendiary tweets? Will we see a less confrontational style? And will we see a more pragmatic, practical, common sense, what can I get done to put some wins on the board? It's one thing to do it in foreign policy, where presidents have a lot more unilateral power than what we're going to see going forward when he faces the debt ceiling and health care and tax reform and what lies ahead on the agenda.
Michael Beschloss, let's go to fantasy land right now and pretend that what's happened over the past week.
As soon as possible, Joe.
Yes, that what happened the past week will be consistent Trump policy for the next 3.5 years. If that is in fact the case, do you agree with David Ignatius that he's triangulating China and Russia? What presidential policy does the last week of what you've seen, what does that bring to mind to you?
Well, you know, if there is a doctrine, you know, I guess what we would look for is earlier times when a president, and what a doctrine usually is not you know, 2 days of bombing in Afghanistan and Syria, and then we all say, isn't that terrific? We've got a doctrine now. What it usually is a president saying, I've got a strategy. That's what Reagan did at the beginning. He said, I'm going to take a new approach to the Cold War. I'm going to try to challenge the Soviets around the world. Once I've done that, I think that they will sue for peace. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. But of course, David Ignatius, Peter Baker reported that the emerging Trump doctrine was don't follow doctrine.
Right.
Well, he believes in being unpredictable. He's made that clear. And so what the next unpredictable thing we'll see from this man, it's hard to know. Michael, you've looked at so many presidents. You've seen presidents succeed and fail. Is there, if you could have 5 minutes with President Trump tomorrow, what would you tell him about how not to blow it in this moment when he seems to be getting a little momentum?
Well, I think one thing is what you've all been saying this morning, which is getting the expertise he really needs in areas that he does not know about. Foreign policy and military policy, he's shown that he's willing to do that. Domestic policy, you know, let's see if he finds the current day, you're not going to find one, but a current day version of Jim Baker. And the other thing is, you know, I just have to say it, this is a very ahistorical president. You know, it's not someone who, you know, we're talking this morning about the Reagan doctrine. I'm not sure he knows that kind of history. You know, one thing that really is a thread that runs through every great president that I can think of is at least knowing what presidents in history have done to become successful. You'll never find an exact parallel, but if you just ignore all that, you're not benefiting from the successes and the failures that presidents have made for 200 years, and the same is true with citizens.
All right, Nancy Gibbs, I want to talk about your cover because I have been following, actually, Sheryl Sandberg, especially so since her husband passed away, and thought that her first blogs in the weeks after his death were some of the most incredible writings I have ever read and that she has ever done. She's now written a book. She's talking more about grief and about time off and about recovery. Can you tell us about why you put this on the cover?
Because, you know, once again, Sheryl has, I think, found a way to take a conversation that we all as humans have, in this case, about how you try to help someone who is facing terrible adversity, and how often we get it wrong, where I think she was so compelling in that incredible post she did a month after her husband died, was saying all these things that she now realized she would say to people who had just gotten a terrible diagnosis or who had lost someone they loved, that were very well intentioned, were exactly the wrong thing to say, because she now heard all these things that people were saying to her that were meant to be kind and
like
helpful.
what?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
so we know what not to say.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be okay, and that, you know, she says the best you can sort of hope for is it'll be okay today, or the people when she went back to work who were saying, you know, don't worry, if we can help you if you're not able to finish your assignments or get your work done, which was meant to be, you know, supportive and helpful, but she said her confidence was so shattered that everyone who was trying to take her workload off just signaled to her, yeah, we don't think you're competent to get the job done right now. Wow. And it created this sort of vicious spiral. She talks about the 3 Ps, she says, that you think that this sorrow is somehow your fault, is wall to wall in your life and it's going to last forever, that it's personal, it's pervasive, and it's permanent. Those are sort of 3 myths of grief that she's now trying to look at and say none of those 3 things has to be true, that it's okay to laugh, it's okay to have a sense of humor. There are so many taboos around grief, which makes it hard to talk about, so we talk about it badly. What she's trying to do is help us find a better way to talk about it, and in a way, for her, have something that's good and healthy and constructive come out of this situation that was so fundamentally tragic in her life, her family's life.
Nancy Gibbs, thank you very much. Michael Beschloss, thank you as well. Up next, what the incident with the man getting dragged off that United flight says about the state of morality and corporate culture in America, and why you may hear about it in your Easter Sunday sermon. Keep it right here on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.